Welcome back to our live coverage of the state here on 12 News, here on WPRI.com. I'm 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi, joined by my Target 12 colleague Steph Machado. Coming up, we're going to recap some of the highlights from the speech tonight, as well as the Republican response, and get reaction from 12 News political analyst Joe Fleming. So, Steph, I have to start off by saying I've covered a lot of state of the states over the years. You have too. This was just such a different feeling speech without the usual pomp and circumstance.
That's right. It was so unusual. You know, we're accustomed to being in the room. It's extremely crowded. The dignitaries are flowing in, the judges in their robes.
Yeah, for people who've never been there, you can barely move in that room. There's so many extra chairs.
The opposite of a pandemic-safe situation in normal years. The mayors are there, the House and Senate, you know, all in one room. There's lots of handshaking and hugging and everything that we can't do in a pandemic. So it was so unusual to see, you know, that wide shot of the House chambers with basically just the House Speaker, the Senate President, and the governor's immediate family there. And just so different and maybe a little bit awkward when there couldn't be applause during some of her big lines. You know, you hear her talk about how the Supreme Court is majority women now. That certainly would have gotten, you know, a standing ovation probably from the chamber. So unusual because of the pandemic and the way the speech was given, but then also the content of the speech, because it was focused on the accomplishments the governor says that she, you know, made in her 6 years as governor, rather than looking forward to the next year. Yeah, and so let's hear a little of what the governor had to say tonight. As you say, Steph, obviously a lot of this felt more like a farewell address than a state of the state, which usually looks forward, talks about the upcoming agenda. And the governor was looking all the way back early in the speech to her first inauguration.
6 years ago, on a cold, snowy day, I stood on the State House steps. And I vowed to you at that time that together we were going to ignite Rhode Island's comeback. Now, if you think back to that time, 2014, we were stuck. Our economy was stuck. Our state was stuck in the wake of the Great Recession, and we had been for years. And there were a lot of people who told me at that time they thought our problems were too big to solve. We couldn't get out of it. The system was broken, too broken to be fixed. So as a result, some folks lowered their expectations. And I think more than a little bit of cynicism set in. But on that cold and snowy day, we together committed to a fresh start. And at that time, I asked every one of you to ask yourselves how you could be part of Rhode Island's comeback. And in the last 6 years, Rhode Island stepped up over and over again. Rhode Islanders stepping up to become part of the solution, committing to doing things differently, committing to believing, really believing, that change was possible, and to harnessing that eternal optimism of our founders as we together charted a new course. We rolled up our sleeves and we got to work.
So you heard the governor kind of setting the big picture version of how she views her, what will likely be her 6 years in office, presuming she wins confirmation as Commerce Secretary as expected. You know, as these speeches usually had, you had the laundry list of policies, Steph. You could see each department battling for its paragraph. She talked about health care. She talked about the environment. She talked about transportation. Economic development, of course, came right up near the top, which has been such a priority for her. But also interesting, she spent quite a bit of time on a topic you cover, education.
Yeah, and you know, she's getting a parting gift from the General Assembly, the leaders of both chambers supporting a bill to make her Rhode Island Promise Scholarship permanent, which was a key achievement for her. Of course, she wanted to get free tuition at all the state's colleges, but she did manage to get that through for CCRI, and so it looks as though even after she leaves, that will remain a free tuition program. Also, universal pre-K was one of her big promises she made in the 2018 campaign. She said by the end of her second term, term, we would have universal pre-K in Rhode Island. That promise will not be fulfilled since she's not, she's leaving halfway through her second term, but as she mentioned, the number of seats did quadruple, so something that she's proud of, and we'll have to see if we do get universal pre-K in the future in the McKee administration.
And of course, as we've talked about at the top, the pandemic was a shadow cast over this entire speech. The governor did spend a sizable portion of the speech reflecting on the coronavirus pandemic, reflecting on the toll it took, saying the State House is being lit tonight for the more than 2,000 Rhode Islanders who have died with coronavirus. Here's a little of what she said about the pandemic.
That Rhode Island is in a good, stable place. Our weekly percent positive is about 3%. That's lower than it's been in months. Our hospitalizations continue to decline. We've performed over 2.5 million tests and administered over 100,000 vaccines. So by every measure, we are on the right path, we are on solid footing, and yes, the end is finally in sight.
Certainly the numbers are better. We have our track cases page on WPRI.com that our colleague Eli Sherman keeps up with, which, I
look at it every day.
Same here. I hope you do too, folks watching at home. But, you've seen hospitalizations come down, but they had gotten so high that what we now see as an improvement would have looked terrible just a couple months ago. And the other thing, Steph, is, the governor has basically disappeared from public view for the most part, obviously tonight being a major exception, and the briefing when she came back, along with her confirmation stuff. And we are hearing from a lot of folks who are frustrated she hasn't taken a question from reporters since before Christmas.
Yeah, and I think part of this is because she was so visible at the start of the pandemic. Rhode Islanders were accustomed to seeing her on their TV sets at one point daily, telling them what was going to happen next in the pandemic response. And you can see her here escaping our cameras after the most recent briefing that she attended. She has stopped attending the weekly coronavirus briefing. She used to do a weekly, sit-down interview with 12 News. Those obviously ended. And so the public was accustomed to seeing her be questioned by reporters on a weekly or multiple times a week basis. And so it is unusual now, with the pandemic still happening, it's not over, to see the governor disappear from public view, stop taking questions, stop going to her COVID briefings. It's very noticeable for.
Yeah, and certainly while her aides, maintain she's still busy behind the scenes, still active, having Zoom calls and stuff. But as there are questions about the vaccine rollout, et cetera, it does feel like people would like to be able to hear directly from her explaining what's going on.
Exactly.
Let's talk about, the wrap-up of this speech, which was, the whole speech was a bit of a farewell. This was the valedictory. This was, looking back, going all the way back to her childhood, her grandfather, this famous story of her father getting the job at the Bull of a Watch Factory that the reporters could recite by heart now because she's told it so many times since she started running for office. But there was you could tell this seemed to come from the heart with the governor as she reflected on leaving Rhode Island for a job in Washington. Let's listen.
Rhode Island is where my brother and my sister and I were born and grew up and rode the waves every summer at Sand Hill Cove Beach. It's where Andy and I were married. It's where Cece and Tommy were born. It's where I started my business and where I have had the honor of a lifetime to serve as your treasurer and as your governor. And I hope you know just how grateful I am and always will be for the trust that you've placed in me these past 10 years that we have worked side by side. Rhode Island is and always will be my home. I have to say, it's very difficult for me to leave Rhode Island. It is a bittersweet moment. If I'm confirmed as Commerce Secretary, it will indeed be a privilege to serve in President Biden's cabinet. And we have a lot of work to do to rebuild America, rebuild the American economy, and lift up those who have been left behind. And I see it as a continuation of all the work we've done here together these past 6 years.
Steph, we both noticed a little tip of the cap to her new boss by saying "Build Back Better,"
exactly,
which is, of course, President
slogan.
Biden's big slogan. All right, I want to bring in 12 News politics analyst Joe Fleming. Joe, it's good to see you, though socially distanced, of course. You've watched a lot of the state addresses over the years. Talk about how this one compares to the others and what stood out to you.
Well, this is very different. Most of the time when a governor gives a state of the state, it also includes the budget message. So they're talking about the budget a lot of times, what's going to take place the next year, what the governor is asking the General Assembly to do. This speech had none of that at all. This speech talked about her past 6 years, what she's accomplished. So it was a very different speech from what we're used to seeing from a governor.
And Joe, what do you think the governor's legacy is going to be in Rhode Island, when she leaves fairly shortly?
Well, I think part of it is being the first female governor. I think also her work with education, the pre-K, the full-day kindergarten, the Promise program at CCRI, the new construction for the schools. I think that's going to be a big thing. Also, I think the way that she handled the pandemic early on. Residents of Rhode Island really responded to that. We saw polling numbers of her results in the high 70s, low 80s for job approval. Normally she has like in the 40% range. So Rhode Island residents responded very well to her with the pandemic early on. Now in the last month where we haven't seen much of her, that may have changed some. But early on she had a lot of support and people remember that.
Yeah, Joe, I remember you and I texting each other when some of those early poll numbers came out saying it was like a different person compared to what you and I were used to seeing. Let's talk about the man who's going to be replacing her, assuming nothing gets derailed on her confirmation vote in Washington, and it looks like that's on track. That's Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee, former mayor of Cumberland, of course. What does Dan McKee have to do once he hits center stage? He, of course, wants to run for governor in his own right at the end of next year.
He has to get up to speed really fast. For the last 6 years, the governor's pretty much kept him out of the picture. He really didn't know what was going on. So he has to educate himself very fast. He has to get a budget together very quickly to the General Assembly. And the big thing is, how well is he going to work with Joe Sacacci and Dominic Ruggiero in the House and Senate? Can he work with the two of them to get things accomplished? I think Dan McKee is going to try to do a number of things. I think we've seen Dan McKee move more towards the center since it looks like he's going to be the governor. So I think you'll see a little change in Dan McKee. He's going to try to build support around him so he can run in 2022. And I think you're going to see him spending a lot of time raising money over these next 2 years also. But I think he's going to try to move the state forward. I think there's going to be some things that he might be concerned with, like if the General Assembly tries to do the $15 minimum wage. Dan McKee is a big supporter of small business. They're going to be probably strongly opposed to that. So it's going to put him in a tough position. So he's going to have a number of challenges over the next 2 years.
And Joe, I don't know if this is the last, we've seen of Governor Raimondo. She's only 49. We don't know how long she's going to be in Washington. Do you think she'd be successful coming back at some point, running for U.S. Senate or higher office?
Well, being out of the limelight a couple of years, it's tough to come back sometimes. People forget very quickly. Other people move forward into their spots. The question is, what can she run for? It would obviously be U.S. Senate. There's no Senate races in 2022. 2024 is Sheldon Whitehouse. The next one after that will be Jack Reed. Now, who knows what Jack Reed would do after these 6 years he just got reelected for. That would be her first opportunity, I believe, to run for something else. That's a long time in politics.
Yeah, and Governor's always insisted to me when I've asked her about it that she would hate the United States Senate because she likes being an executive and sitting around for filibusters wouldn't be her favorite thing. But people's minds can change. She was saying she wasn't going to Washington a couple of weeks ago. So
exactly.
Joe Fleming, our political analyst, Joe's going to be joining us again on 12 News later tonight and in the morning. Joe, thanks for your analysis always.
Thanks, Joe.
Pleasure.
All right, let's talk about the Republican response we heard tonight, Steph. The Republicans put forward Senator Jessica De La Cruz, someone she acknowledged at the top of her speech might be a new face to the viewers at home. Tell us a little bit, as someone who covers the State House, about Senator De La Cruz.
Yeah, she's a Republican from the northwest corner of the state. She represents North Smithfield, Burrillville, and Gloucester. She's just starting her second term in the Senate, and she's the minority whip. Obviously a younger senator, and she's really, in her first term, got a reputation for standing up a lot to oppose or make amendments to the bills that Democrats were supporting. So she's certainly an up-and-comer in the Republican Party. Yeah,
and a lot of Republicans quite hopeful about her political future as they look to build a bench. Let's listen to a little what Senator De La Cruz had to say in the Republican response.
We look forward to joining our Democrat and independent colleagues to address the challenges we face. We cannot do this alone, but we can do it together. Good night, and God bless.
There you go, the tail end of the speech, which came up right before we came on here. But, Steph, she talked about 5 key priorities for the Republicans. Obviously, always tough for the Republicans in Rhode Island. They are vastly outnumbered at the State House. How many cycles now have we gone through where the Republicans we talked to had high hopes and then dashed, when the election returns come in? But certainly she saw some issues where she thinks, and the Republicans think, that they can get traction with voters even if they often are voting for Democrats. Yeah,
for example, she mentioned opposing the charter school moratorium, and that's something that a lot of parents who want to have more choice for where their kids go to school could get on board with. And of course, the Republicans are always concerned about the ballooning budget, but it's tough to get enough of them to sort of vote that down. There's such a minority. But it's, the line item veto, for example, so things that we often hear from Republicans.
Yeah, so you heard some of their familiar themes, and of course they're going to be looking for their own candidate for governor to field in 2022 and hope to have a strong showing with the seat open. Well, I guess I say open. I guess it's not open because Dan McKee will be the governor and really running as the incumbent.
So we've been talking for years
a different kind of situation
open,
from what they faced in 2018. All right, well, let's talk some more about Dan McKee. And I mentioned there he's a former mayor of Cumberland, but we keep finding that he's won 2 terms as lieutenant governor, yet a lot of rounders just don't know a lot about him. You've covered him for years. What can you tell us?
And that's partly because the lieutenant governor and the governor in Rhode Island don't run as a team. He has not been part of Team Raimondo.
Different from Massachusetts.
Different from Massachusetts, and so he's not the president of the Senate as other states have, so it's just he's not as visible, but here he is. He was the mayor of Cumberland. He lives in Cumberland. He is big on cities and mayors for sure, and municipal independence, and cities and towns getting to sort of make their own decisions. Big charter school proponent. He serves on a board of a charter school, which he's going to resign once he's the governor, and big, obviously, focus on small businesses. We've heard that from him a lot over the past 6 years.
He's been championing them. I also noticed, Steph, you mentioned municipalities. He put, I want to say, 6 of the 20 people on his COVID advisory group today are either mayors or town managers. So, well, just last week, late last week, Dan McKee sat down with our colleague Kim Kalunian to talk a little about his plans, and one of the things she asked him about was the executive orders the governor has been using. Let's listen to some of that conversation.
The governor has issued a flurry of executive orders during the pandemic, and she just extended many of them until February 25th. Any of her executive orders that you'd consider repealing?
Well, I think that it's been a long time, and those executive orders go 30 days at a time. So I would have to take a look at them. But I do think that, is that the General Assembly really plays a really important role. I've talked to the Senate President and the Speaker several times since that call that I got on that Thursday night from the governor, right? And, we're certainly going to try to engage them in the process as well. So I think we'll take a look at it. Many of those executive orders are very, very important, and maybe some of the other executive orders that there can be some level of agreement between us and the General Assembly leadership.
So Dan McKee still trying to feel out, how much, in what ways he wants to exercise power once he is the governor. And of course, that leads the question, when will Dan McKee be the governor? As people probably saw in our newscast this evening, the Senate Commerce Committee voted Governor Raimondo's nomination out successfully, a pretty strong vote, 21-3, bipartisan, to send her to the floor. But as we've been talking about, unless she gets a vote in the next few days, the impeachment trial is supposed to start Monday in the Senate. There's a budget debate happening down there. One of the senior Republican senators said today it might be weeks before a Biden nominee gets a vote again. That could leave Rhode Island in this kind of limbo for longer than some folks were expecting.
Right, exactly. She could be governor for a few more days or a few more weeks, and that's a big difference. And I think the McKee's team is trying to figure out where they fit into the limbo, right? Because she is still the governor of the state, so a member of his team told me today, we can only have one governor at a time. He's trying not to step on toes and start announcing cabinet members and start announcing, I'm going to repeal this executive order, or I'm going to do this or that. But at the same time, she's not going to the COVID briefings, so he has stepped in and started going to those briefings weekly. So we're certainly in an unusual time in a transition that we don't know how long it's going to last, and the governor is much less visible than she usually is during a crisis.
Yeah, I certainly tend to think that there will be, every day this continues, if it goes into next week, let alone further into February, there'll be more pressure on her and her team to have her take a more public role in her current job. Not to say maybe they should have all along, but I think if it's going to go on for a while, that's going to be the case. All right, well, we're going to wrap this up here on WPRI.com, our digital coverage of the state of the state. But coming up at 10 and 11 on 12 News, we'll have a recap. We'll have more fresh reaction from the State House, including a live report from there. And we'll continue that coverage in the morning on 12 News starting at 4:30 a.m. So for Steph Machado, I'm Ted Nesi. Thank you for joining us on WPRI.com.